Welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim. Join hosts Dan Melnick and Qasim Masood as they explore big ideas, limitless possibilities, and engage with visionaries, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders who dare to dream big, get inspired, motivated, and find practical tips for personal growth. Think big, dream bigger, and ignite your potential.
All right, welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim. I'm a team filling in for Qasim today. And our guest today is Jason Mandel. So, Jason, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, tell us where you live and what you do for a living.
Yeah, sure. Thanks first for having me. My name is Jason Mandel. I live just outside of New York City. Been in the marketing and advertising industry for over 20 years. Yeah, so I've been on the agency side, the client side, seen a lot over this time and the way that it's changing now. So I'm really excited to be here and have this conversation.
Awesome. So, what exactly is your role today? And can you talk let's talk a little bit more about that? What you do specifically right now?
Yeah, so right now I'm working with an agency called Indicia Worldwide, and I work primarily in their business development team, working on the Konica Minolta account, and I've been working also with the team to kind of foster relationships with a company called Omnia Partners, which is a big GPO, and kind of more of a different than the traditional agency setting, where this is a little bit more of an efficiency play, where it's for print management and creative production more than anything else.
Awesome. So, can you talk about how you got started in marketing and what made you want to go into that field in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go back to when things were on dial-up and I was in college. But yeah, no, I originally came out of Hofstra University, I went to film school there. And I thought, like so many people, I was gonna go out to LA and you got a screenplay in your back pocket, and you're gonna be the next Steven Spielberg. But I think once reality hits, when you get out of school and you're just like, well, what's another way to kind of use the creative juices that you have, and but maybe not be as risky of doing that. And that's how I kind of found advertising first. And shortly before 9/11 happened, I was working down at an agency down in the city called Saatchi and Saatchi. And that's really where I started in advertising before I went over to the TV side for a bit and found my way back many years later.
That makes sense. So, can you talk a little bit about like your first job and actually how you even got that job, after you graduated from college?
So my first job, I was an account coordinator. So I was in account management right from the beginning. And it was through a recruiter back then. It's very different now how people are hired. But back then, I had graduated in May of 2000, and then by June, I was already started working at an agency in the city. So I was very fortunate from that point of view. I didn't know anyone. It was just kind of like luck of the draw, and you meet someone, you impress someone, and then next thing you know, you're hired. And in that first job, it was very much like it wasn't as creative as I would have hoped, because I didn't know much about the agency world at that time. So it was I worked on an account called Allergan, which is eye drops. We worked on, there was also Transitions, which was the eyeglasses. So it was a little bit more on the healthcare side of it, I suppose. But yeah, that was my first foray into the advertising world, and it was just a big deal the first time I got invited to a meeting just to take notes. I was so green and excited back then. But it's very different now. Because there's so much more access for people, and with the internet, you can learn so many more things. But I was very lucky to have some good mentors there that got me on, kind of got me going.
Awesome. So, in terms of advertising, what would you say makes a brand successful?
I think that there's two main things that makes a brand successful. The number one is knowing who you are as a brand, and number two is knowing who your customer is. And the reason is that successful brands solve problems, right? They solve problems for their customers. Then their brand, over time, you develop the brand to kind of have a likeness that is identified with solving that problem. So you really need to know yourself, and that obviously develops over time as a brand, but you really need to know your customer, and what their pain points are. And from that, you'll be able to kind of work your way to the appropriate solution over time and really find a product market fit. And the rest, you could take the rest about a brand from there. But if you don't have that at the core, I think you're gonna miss from the start.
So can you talk like a little bit more about knowing your customer? Because that is, I agree, is so important. And I think that many companies struggle with identity. They don't know exactly who they're targeting. And if they are going to run ads, like who should they run ads for? What location? What type of people? So how do you find that out and figure that out, especially early on, if somebody's just starting a company?
So I think there's a couple ways to do it. First and foremost, before you even, if let me start again. If you just go out and come up with an idea, you're like, oh, I got this idea, and now I need to find the audience to fit it. You're working backwards. You're much better off knowing what the problem is that you're going to solve, and if you know that problem, you know who that customer is from the beginning, and where they're starting at point A to where they're finishing in point B, and and that's really where, in knowing what that solution is, you have to know that customer. So then you go out and you speak to who that customer is, and you want to get over, probably over like 30 responses as you can. Usually the magic number is 30, kind of to make it statistically relevant, I suppose. But that's really where you want to start. And I know not most people do that, but if you do that and you're able to say and see a trend that says, all right, well, I know I'm seeing a trend that this customer has this pain point and these problems in point A, column A, and we solve them through our product. And now they're, you transform them to whatever that is, big or small, not, to column B. Well, then you've identified the right persona, whether you call them a target audience, whether you call them a persona, whether you call them an avatar, I don't care. It's all the same thing. Then, that's really, that gives you a really good idea of how you're going to test, right? Because you've identified this person, one person, not many people, one person. And then if you're going to do advertising for it, you're going to then look at who that person is. You're going to build in that little, the not just the demographic, but the psychographics of who that person is too, who they, what they like, what they do, who they follow, things like that. And then you can really start to find your, and I don't want to say niche per se, but I want to say you're kind of grouped from there.
In terms of advertising, early on, are you doing lots of beta testing, kind of, testing a different platform, saying, okay, like, where's like my audience hanging out, especially nowadays, like with social media, there are different audiences on TikTok versus Twitter, for example. So what does that look like for you?
Well, I would say for the current company that I'm at, we're not really doing a lot of that. But I could say that for my previous company, when I was at GARP, and that's when I was on the client side of the business. We did a lot of that. I was the head of marketing for GARP, which runs the FRM brand, for the financial risk management certification. And in growing that brand, you do have to test, and that is a very specific audience, right? It's a B2B audience, and they're in specific locations. If you know your customer and you know their problem, you'll know where they are. So for example, if you are if you're doing B2B and you're looking to just help people advance their careers, advertising on platforms like LinkedIn is going to make more sense than spending an entire budget on platforms like TikTok, which is just more entertainment based. If you have a consumer brand and you're trying to reach a younger audience, well, then you're going to want to start building up content on TikTok. If you are looking to reach, baby boomers, or you're looking to reach even, Gen Xers, we're still relevant on Facebook. Dare I say the Facebook word that, we're not allowed to say anymore in advertising, but, the fact of the matter is it still works. It's that all is taken into account for where people are, to try to reach them.
Yeah, I mean, because I think that you mentioned, when we spoke before, that you've worked on lots of commercials. So can you talk like, just more about that? Because I feel like also, I guess you mentioned, right, trends are changing. Maybe people aren't sitting at home all day. Maybe people like are not watching as many commercials. Maybe more so like on YouTube or Hulu or platforms like that, I guess, opposed to actual TV. So, like, what does that look like right now in 2023?
For commercials.
Yeah, just for commercial, like, just relevant sake of commercials.
I think for commercials, the commercial play behind it still has relevance because it meets a large audience. So if you were just at total top of funnel and you want to blast it out and you want to, knowing that there's going to be some waste in your media spend in there, right? You have to know that and be okay with that going in. It's an awareness, it's a top of funnel thing. Don't run commercials and expecting people to convert right away. That's not how it works. And then the other thing with commercials is, so many people nowadays are used to being able to, with digital, measure it accurately, right? I know that if I test A and I test B, I can go here and then I can go here and then I can do this, et cetera, et cetera. TV is not necessarily like that. While the metrics have gotten better over time, particularly with, addressable advertising, through set-top boxes and through streaming platforms, it's definitely not going to be as precise. So you're when you think about commercials nowadays, if you're going to do that, know that it's top of funnel, it's for awareness, and the measure that you want to look for is, are you seeing a spike in visits to your website? Are you seeing not maybe necessarily a specific URL because they may not be able to click through it, but are you seeing kind of some awareness metrics rise a little bit, through Google or direct URL inputs, if people, even really do that anymore. But that's more of where I see commercials now, but I don't think it's dead. It just
So
has a different
yeah,
place.
so it's more of like streaming platforms or even like live sports. Like, if somebody's going to want to run commercials today, yeah, I mean, obviously it depends like on the industry, but where would you kind of recommend that they're going to be running these commercials?
I think that if you want to run ads, the right place to do it is YouTube. I think that, to me, from not just what I've seen as much, but more of who I've been engaging with and who I've been talking to. YouTube is doing a couple of different things. Aside from evolving their platform, most people forget this, they're owned by Google. So the more that you engage with YouTube and you spend with Google or spend with YouTube, you're spending with Google as well, which is going to benefit you in some way. They don't forget about that. Whether it's you get to move in search results to higher in the rankings, or for your video, and of course that's all going to change with now that AI is here and SEO is completely getting flipped on its head, and But I still think that if you're going to run ads, whether you're in a pre-roll, a mid-roll, that's really going to be where you kind of want to be for now.
Awesome. So how do you capture an ad that goes viral? I mean, obviously you mentioned that you work on like the most interesting man in the world campaign. So it's a very viral campaign. Everybody knew about that campaign, one of the most famous advertising campaigns. So how do you create a campaign like that?
Oh gosh. Well, yeah, I worked on Most Interesting Man in the World campaign around 10 years ago when it was kind of in its heyday for Dos Equis. And really what I think part of what made that so successful was the integrated consistency. This is going to be not the answer that you thought of, but it's whether you were on TV or you heard an ad on the radio, because people listened to the radio back then, or you saw something online, or you were in store, or you were to the sell sheet that was given from the sales rep to the bar owner to sell it into the store or the grocery store. All of that had the same message. All of that had the same tone. All of it had the same kind of gravitas to it, where you instantly recognized it. So the sell sheets would have the same type of humor and wit and copy, maybe not to the extent of the ads where it was as good as the ads, but it still had that baked in. And if you have that consistency throughout, and this is important nowadays, because the lesson here is whether you are, back then it was, different mediums, but you have to be consistent in your messaging and in your campaign. That's what gets recognized over time. And then people go, oh, all right, I know what this campaign is. Oh, I know what this brand is. Now I tell you, to that end, there ended up being a little bit of problem with Dos Equis at that point, because so many people knew the campaign, they loved the campaign, they didn't always remember the brand, because it kind of outshined the brand a little bit. That's just such a I think that's more of like an outlier than anything else. But I would say it's all about consistency across all your mediums. So if here nowadays would be if you're running on YouTube and you're running social ads and you're running, I don't think people are doing that many banners anymore, but let's say you're doing banners, or you're doing even your organic posts, same tone, same voice, over and over and over. And that's how I think you do it. I think you do it because if you are in different voice and different tones throughout, it's not going to be recognizable, especially with the amount of noise that's out there now.
Makes sense, but I would say, I mean, that there was something special about that campaign. I mean, just to your point, right? Because it's like there are many campaigns that are very consistent, but I don't know that there's not that memorable. It's like, and I think there are certain campaigns. It's not just that one, just in general in the history of advertising, that even today, 10, 20, 30 years later, people like don't forget those campaigns because they were so good, right? So that's what I mean. I guess like to make those types of campaigns, I think I'm sure it's not necessarily easy, but there's probably some level or some, I guess, common trend that you've seen all those campaigns and the reason why people don't ever forget those campaigns per se.
Yeah, it's that it becomes a pop icon. So the most interesting man is iconic. It's inherent in who that person was, right? A lot of back then it was very, people were able to say like, oh my gosh, this is a lot like what Chuck Norris was, right? Chuck Norris is not as relevant today. Again, I feel like I'm saying that a lot in here, but but it was based on that kind of indestructible, aspirational. That's who I want to be. That's who this guy is. Therefore, I see myself in this particular icon and this character. And this guy drinks Dos Equis. Well, I guess I drink Dos Equis too. And it's kind of that through line of what you would typically call like lifestyle advertising, right? So I see myself in that persona, so therefore I am. You see this a lot with Nike now. Well, not just now, but Nike does a great example of this, right? Like with Nike ads, and it's kind of whether they were, over the years, whether they had Michael Jordan all those years ago, or to all the players that they have now, and even to the non-athlete spots that they run, it's they're not just selling clothing, they're selling the competition, the working your butt off, the challenge, the perseverance, the sweat. They're like, that's how I work, and because I work that hard in what I do in my sport, that's why I wear Nikes. So it becomes more of again, going back to our first thing in the beginning, it's like, know your customer. Nike talks to one person, the person who's acting like that, right? And who has that mindset, whether they're male or female or young or old. That may change. Different sports, okay, fine. That you may need to change the copy a little bit. You may need to change the imagery or the culture if you're in different regions of the world. Totally cool. The mentality is the same, right? I think Seth Godin once said, the famous marketer Seth Godin once said, he did this comparison between Nike and I'm going to forget the hotel. It might have been Hyatt. If I have it wrong, I think it was Hyatt, but it could have been something else. And what he said was, if you were to flip flop and I'm totally giving credit to Seth Godin here, but if you flip flop the products, right? Let's just say it was Hyatt, because I think it was Hyatt. So if Hyatt had a shoe, or maybe what would it look like? You go, I don't know. That's kind of generic. But if Nike had a hotel, you go, I know exactly what that would look like. That's branding. That's knowing your customer. And that's something that's your through line, no matter what media you're in, or even if you were to change your product, right?
Makes sense. So what would you say is the one biggest piece of advice that you wish you knew before you started your career?
Client work's a lot harder than you think it's ever going to be. A lot of people go into it going like, this is what I want to do because this is what, that it's all creative and it's all fun and it's all like these big bright ideas. That's not necessarily how marketing and advertising is. That's, I think, the perception of how it is, but it's a lot more based in psychology and business rigor and knowing, kind of the formulas and frameworks of how things work. And then you can get creative once you know those things. So recognizing that now, I probably would have been a little bit more grounded in my creative approach when I was younger. But yeah, it's a lot more customer focused than it is your creative focused, which is definitely a lesson for people who want to get into it now.
That makes sense. So, if somebody watching this wanted to reach out to you. Do you mind sharing like the best way to get in contact with you?
Yeah, sure. You can email me. I'm at jasonmandel.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter or X or whatever they want to call it tomorrow. Those are probably the best places.
Awesome. Well, Jason, I want to say thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed our conversation. I learned a lot. So, yeah, thank you so much.
Me as well. Thank you so much for having me, Dan.
Was yeah, thanks. All right. All right. Bye.
See you.